Hello, YouTube. It's just going to be a sort of quick little video for Christmas Eve. This is going to be more of a montage style video of my dad and I making our first homemade panettone. We are basically following Chef Step's recipe that they released last holiday season with some minor alterations. I also did make some mistakes with the modifications I made, which is partially why I'm not going into super detail with this footage. Next week, I will hopefully have another Panettone video with a more original recipe that I'm working on right now. I've also become somewhat fascinated with panettone as this, interesting form factor for a enriched bread with a lot of different sort of fillings. So I'm also thinking about making different interesting panettones for every season of the year. I think the Chef Steps recipe is a really good version of the recipe, and their main focus was making it hypothetically doable within 24 hours. I have more so used their recipe to get an idea for good ratios, but I've definitely extended the process back to a multi-day process just because that's actually more convenient for me. Panettone is traditionally a sort of sourdough natural leaven based product, and their recipe still use that, and they even enhance that fermented flavor by calling for buttermilk. I followed suit by using mostly milk and then a little bit of homemade yogurt in my liquid starter. But in the future, I'm not sure if this made a big impact beyond just using the sourdough in the first place. But I made it a day ahead before combining it with the rest of the dough. I also used a small amount of freshly milled flour because, of course, I did. In this case, it was Corson wheat that we fine sifted. Other than that, I followed the rest of the Chef Steps recipe pretty closely. One mistake I did make was cutting back on the yeast too much because I am used to using quite little for overnight fermentation versus same day fermentation. But I think the sugar level in this type of bread requires a decent amount of yeast in either scenario. And I am using a gold label yeast, which is osmotolerant, or it can handle slightly sweetened doughs. That is primarily everything noteworthy to say about the actual recipe, but I thought I would also take this opportunity to do a little channel update for the end of the year. I would say for most of the year, or at least half the year, I've tried to be pretty consistent with uploading, and I've always just made recipes and videos that I've wanted to make, but I've always tried to make them somewhat marketable for YouTube, and in general, I think that has uh, failed pretty miserably in terms of growing the channel. There's no upward trend in views or comments or feedback, really, and that's never been my main focus, but I try to make interesting original recipes, so the hope is that somebody will make them or draw inspiration from them. I also released my self-published cookbook, Gelato Obsession, in the summer, so it'd obviously be great to continue to sell some copies of that, and I also just like continuing to develop gelato and sorbet recipes in general, and it would also be great to have the bandwidth or impetus to potentially create another cookbook. As always, I'd be happy to get suggestions and feedback from people, but just given the stagnation on the channel, despite the recent period of fairly focused effort and other past periods of effort, it's just going to be less of a priority. I'll probably still upload close to once a week, depending on what I'm working on. It's just not going to be as big a focus. As always, I am pretty active on other platforms like Instagram and Twitter, so I'll always be posting recipes and projects there. There may be more text-based blog posts on my website as opposed to videos in the new year. With all those thoughts out of the way, let's return to the panettone for the big reveal of cutting it open. As I mentioned, I didn't use quite enough yeast, so it wasn't ridiculously fluffy. If you have seen the Chef Steps video about this recipe, but the density and the structure was actually similar to other brioche style breads I have made in the past, and I was happy with the flavor and the distribution of chunks. So if you've made it to the end of this video, I hope everybody has a good holiday season as they can. Like I said, I should be uploading one more video this year with my upgraded new panettone recipe. Otherwise, thank you for watching.